Hello, everyone. Welcome to our LinkedIn event today. Welcome to you wherever you're joining from in the world. In today's topic, we are joined by our co-founder and CEO, Florian Forster, who will walk us through the aspects of why enterprises still need to look beyond authentication and for an identity infrastructure solution. In today's session, he will cover the direct comparison of Zitadel versus Auth0 to help you make the right decision or right choice for enterprise identity. Flo, over to you.
Thank you, and welcome everybody for this talk of mine on giving you a little bit on a roadshow and pointers on what we do differently than, let's say, for example, in this case, Auth0. So if you ever feel the need like to ask questions, just shoot some messages there. I'm happy to give you pointers and try to be concise on it. But with that said, I'm going to run you through some of the, let's say, things we do differently than Auth0, some of the inspirations we took from Auth0, and also why and where we started the journey. So with that said, let us get into the meat. There is some obvious pain points that made us actually move and start thinking about building something way back in, let's say, 2020, 2021, 2020, around that area, because we were working in the identity space and had some observations around what other tools are doing. And we also got our fair share of insights of Auth0 from that point in time. And it actually mostly broke down into, let's say, these bullet points here. It's like, yeah, one of the primary cornerstones that was a pain point to us at that point in time was really down to, hey, multi-tenancy is not that great. And that had a lot of things to do with where we were as a team when we started thinking about Zitadel, because we were building multi-tenant software for, let's say, government-related use cases where you have a lot of like business to government interaction, government to government interaction. And in many cases, it was just cumbersome to configure existing identity tools or use them in such a setting. You can think of it a little bit like a B2B setting, because each customer might have a different configuration, and that just was cumbersome. And we also evaluated Auth0 at that point, and we're clearly not into that multi-tenancy capabilities. Bear with me though, they changed, as everybody does change and adopt to the market. So they expanded on their multi-tenancy capabilities over the course of the years. But I think their support today still inferior to ours because they have a different data model to it. I'm happy to give you the insights and on what the exact differences are. But with that said, let's just move on through the other things that made us build Zitadel in the first place, right? Also, auth, and I actually chose auth and not authentication authorization. I did that by choice here, is always an effort to maintain. So you need to spend quite a lot of money and time on it to keep it secure. So it's not a typical one-off thing where you just write some code, deploy it, and call it a done deal, because the threat landscape always changes. And so yeah, maintaining an auth system takes a little bit. And so we thought, hey, it's also a good thing if we build something that can be used for multiple people, multiple ecosystems, multiple stakeholders, because then we can essentially professionalize the way we do it, and other people can harness the benefit there. So that's to be said. I mean, also at that point, no cloud native architectures were around. What I mean by that essentially is like, okay, just deploying some container somewhere was just coming around from the Kubernetes landscape in general. So there was identity systems that you can deploy on let's say, cloud native architectures, but they were not built for it. And that has a lot of pain points around things like zero downtime deployments, A/B deep testing with the identity services and these things. So that was a clear pain point to us at that point as well. And many of these tools felt more like, let's say, IT-oriented, like built for IT personnel, but not for developers, because they had crude ideas around APIs and how to use them. So that was definitely a big part of the frustration there. Auth0 in that case, though, did a little better because they at least had good APIs, but still their tool was somewhat constricted, for example, in the area of how much you can customize the login UI. There was log.js and these things, so there is always a left and right. And actually, we took quite a lot of inspiration from some of their approaches there. But yeah, having that was also a concern from time to time. Then oftentimes the default audit capabilities were not that great. What I mean by that is like, yeah, you needed to dump the log files somewhere, maybe in an Elastic, maybe into Datadog, whatever. But essentially, it was kind of hard for identity systems at that point in time to replicate on what was going on, like to really understand, hey, a user did something, a user changed something, user authenticated from somewhere. So all these data points were not that well made visible and stored in let's say in the broader identity space. And we thought that also a little bit cumbersome, so we set out to change that as well. I think many of these tools were also hard to extend and integrate. What I mean by that is like if you have an already existing landscape of applications, such a tool needs to be somewhat in a fashion that you can easily extend and augment its behaviors to make it fit your landscape. For example, if you have like a CRM and if a user signs up, you want to create a new record into your CRM, you need to have a way of extending the identity infrastructure's capabilities so that it can actually send, for example, an event to a piece of code that then adds a record into your CRM, right? Auth0, to their credit, actually had quite the famous rules and hooks concept in the early days. I think they replaced and call it nowadays actions, which followed the same idea that we had. So I think they did actually quite a good job on that end, I must say, though. Also, machine identities were not generally really mature. So I thought that's also something one should look out, because some of our competitors just let's say they misuse OAuth client ideas for machine identities. Some have service accounts, so there is not like a proper bottom line on how that works. And we thought, looking at it from an identity perspective, that's also where people could have some notable improvements. So I think these are the big pain points here that really made us build Zitadel in the first place. With that said, we took a lot of inspiration from Auth0. So I cannot even say something bad about them. I really liked the way Auth0 built their product structure back in the day and also today. I think where we parted ways quite severely is in certain areas where we felt like Auth0 was missing a little bit in things that we would have needed and liked to see. And to my take, that mainly boils down to they have a different twist in multi-tenancy than we. So I think that's a big differentiator that we actually think is really crucial for us. Self-hosting and control where data stays in this process is super important to us and our customers typically. So I would call it self-hosting data residency. And in the early days, there was even the ability with Auth0 to self-host. They sent you like that appliance thingy that you could run. So we definitely wanted to have something that you can self-host, because we now see more and more customers actually asking for that again. So that's an important thing. Also, I think the extensibility piece in Auth0 was like they just had one way of doing it, and I think it lacked out in capabilities. What I mean by that is like you had only certain events that you could use to trigger something that happens. And in Zitadel, we strive a little further than that. So for example, in Zitadel, you can even intercept an HTTP request from the API and alter it in a way that fits your business. Or all changes that happen in Zitadel are events, and we can send them to a customer's piece of code where the customer then can decide, hey, I want to do something with that information, like the stream of events that are going on. So we think we have a little bit more extensibility. In regard to flexibility, I would say the thing that we did differently is we see us clearly as an infrastructure tool. So you can use for example, you can use our login UI as you could have done with Auth0, but also you can build your totally own login UI that even provides like an OpenID compliant and SAML capable login to your applications. So I think we go there just a little bit further in regard of flexibility, which mainly is appealing, I would say, in upper mid-market companies which have broader landscapes and complex architectures and enterprises. So I think that's an important piece there. Also on transparency, I mean, Auth0 had a really great SDKs, and I think still to the day they made some really good stuff there. I think what I thought missing, and let's say a lot of our customers also, is like the transparency you get from what's in the tool, like how is it run, how is it maintained, what are the versions and all that stuff. So like really sharing the meat of the core product. That is clearly not there because it's a closed source cloud service, right? And we definitely set out to do that different. Like we want to have full transparency. That's why we run most of our let's say most of our changes and fixes in over on GitHub in our repository. We even do like all the security disclosure there so that customers can really see what we're doing, because we want to give trust and transparency to our customers. We dearly believe that's an important piece of a security company. Yeah. So also pricing is always a matter of debate with Auth0. I think they were really doing the good work in the early days with their monthly active user pricing. I think what everybody hated there was like the cutoff line when you needed to have multi-factor authentication and you suddenly needed to pay more for getting more security. Because at least to my taste, it kind of defeats the purpose of a security system to charge for security. But that's kind of a missionary thing, though, so don't take it. So take it with a little bit of salt here, if I say that. Yeah. So what now? What is Citadel then? So we strive to be the perfect culmination in between Keycloak and Auth0. No, jokes aside. But I think it has some truth to it, because Keycloak was a really well-renowned open source project. Also has its kinks and flaws, like everybody. Like it includes even us, right? But I always thought like, hey, why is there not like that thing that sits between Auth0 and Keycloak? Like it's a modern take on what identity should look like. It has modern APIs and stuff, but also self-hostable, but in a way that is a little bit easier than a Keycloak was in the past. And so we came up with that fusion dance joke at one point in our life. And I think it still has some truth to it. But yeah, let's say, what did we fix then? Yeah, well, I think someone in LinkedIn already pointed it out in the chat. Is like, yeah, we are clearly multi-tenant at the core, and there is even multiple flavors of Citadel, so to say, in multi-tenancy. So you can use it for a classic B2B scenario where you just need it, or you can even use it like you want to run multiple segregated customers, like isolated from each other. We can totally serve both cases. So I think we do a really supreme job on that end. We clearly provide choice of deployment options. What I mean by that is you can either use our cloud service, which currently has 4 regions across the globe, which is hands off. You don't need to care too much about updates and everything, right? Like a classical SaaS offering. But also you can totally run Citadel on your own by just deploying it on, for example, a Kubernetes cluster. Essentially needs a Postgres, and if you want to have a little bit of caching, a Redis to get started. So it's relatively low friction there. And we clearly fixed like extensibility with your code. So we can send you all the things that happen in Citadel to, let's say, a cloud function or that you control. Like you can deploy that on Cloudflare first. You can deploy it on App Engine from Google. We don't care too much. Where you can write your own code and augment the behavior of Citadel. So, for example, if you want to do something like a ban list and check whether a certain counter is allowed to call Citadel, we can give you that information. You can deny requests. If you want to create a record in Salesforce, yeah, easy. We can give you the client registration. We can give you when a new tenant signs up. We can give you this information. You can work with them, right? So it makes an easy integration into existing landscapes. So we have APIs for close to everything. As always, there's like a 0.1% thing that does not have an API, but it's important to us. We are an API first product, so we have a lot of APIs for quite a lot of things. And we have full transparency with open source. You can go on GitHub, you see everything. And we have a slightly modern take on pricing, and we'll share more in the coming weeks about that. But I can say I'm kind of want to get rid of the per user pricing models because I think it's time for a change on that end. Yeah. So all in all, I think our approach here is like we want to be like a platform player, meaning we want to come from left to right and make everybody happy. It starts with the operations guys that needs to deploy and monitor and update Citadel, right? So we also want to make them happy. And we want to make developers happy. They need authentication, authorization, a little bit of analytics to figure out what's going on. Maybe some logs to see, hey, is everybody is everybody doing good? And also, let's say later this year, we'll also start embarking more into the security area by giving security folks also some meaningful insights on what's going on with your identities. Because as an identity system, we already have a lot of quite high quality data, and we'll want to give you back some of these insights, like, for example, potential alerts and potential breaches that you can then funnel to your SOC CM landscape for further processing. Because we ideally believe an identity system should also collect some audit and access information, because it just naturally is easy to aggregate what users are doing under a user, because essentially the user is doing it. And that applies to humans as well as machines in that case, because for us as product, we don't make a difference between the two, besides that they have different authentication capabilities. Like in machine-to-machine scenarios, you need to have different mechanics, but still it's a user that wants to do something, so the same patterns typically apply on both of the both of the user groups there. So where does Citadel work the best? I think that's a very big question in all of that, right? So I ideally believe in all scenarios, multi-tenant, that's where we work the best. I mean, it's literally down to, hey, I have an application, I want to run a B2B case, because each of your customers or business partners want to have their own configuration. That's where we really work well, I think, because and it's really down to some funny things, like even if you have like a B2B case and you want to onboard Entra ID customers, like we used to call it Azure AD, right, in the past. Each of these tenants could have a different configuration in their Entra ID. And so things like mapping the fields from their IDP to the right fields in Citadel is something that is configurable within Citadel, so that you don't need to build out all these permutations of different identity sources. So that's one of the things. But also, I think B2C cases with multiple brands work really well. Like if you want to have a consolidated identity infrastructure, but you have like multiple stores that you want to maintain. That's also a scenario that works quite well for us, because Citadel allows both level of tenancy, and you can configure them as you need, meaning you can have different domains, you can have different policies for different user groups, you can have different identity providers like social logins, for example, for different business partners and our customers, right? So all in all, we just do the plumbing work there for you. So you just have an API on our end. You can tell us, hey, I want to have single sign-on with Google for customer A. I want to have single sign-on with SAML for customer B. And we can even go so far as I want to have a login with LDAP, like the good old LDAP protocol, for another customer, because that still tends to happen. And so that's why we see ourselves really like as an infrastructure component that just gets the plumbing work done for you, so that you don't need to take care too much of these multi-tenant problems and all the permutations it brings along for having all the settings. And that goes beyond this, because there is also like delegated authorization management. Like one customer can give another customer right to do things. We also allow for like delegation cases. That's a thing we see in some SaaS products especially. But I don't want to deploy too much of that knowledge right now because it gets really deep at one point. So that's definitely, I would say, our strong suit that works the best. But also, there is more, right? So if you need clear data residency, so you really want to know where your data stays and is processed, well, you're into, I would say, for a self-hosting gig, because, I mean, it's the only way you get total control. It also goes into the domain of if you have strict compliance requirements, can be like if you have FedRAMP combined with a weird requirement on keeping data somewhere in a data center. There is a cross culmination between the two, and we clearly want to give you Citadel in that case because you can just deploy it on infrastructure you control, and you can totally update it alongside your release schedule, so you have control. And I think that's worth quite a lot nowadays because you as a company and customer can then be more in a driver's seat. But I think that's also down to some customers like the hands-off SaaS approach. We provide that for people who don't want to entail themselves in that operations management stuff, but also the self-hostable product is really down to you can twist all the knobs. You can make it work for your specific scenario. You can choose your own infrastructure. So there is a lot of good things in that offering stream, I would say. And that's contrary to a lot of our competition here because most of it is either like classic SaaS oriented, or it's more like on the front end authentication space where you just squeeze something into your UI. But I don't think that classifies as an identity infrastructure tool that serves a different crowd there, which typically is more like enterprise and mid-market scenarios. If you also, another point, I mean, if some people and some scenarios prefer open source, maybe, I mean, we've seen some demand on the government side there, since public money is always a question on, hey, is it also feasible to take something that's a little bit more open to have more scrutiny done there? So the public money part definitely comes also into the prefer open source journey here. What we're also work great is you want to replace the DIY solution that you already have around that starts hitting some age problems or starts showing some of the scalability limits. That's where we are super interested in these cases. And also, if you want to integrate it, generally speaking, in a broader landscape that already exists, because you can tweak Citadel to quite a lot of these cases. And so I would say the superior flexibility that we have and the API first approach is definitely something that works for these cases. So if you have one of these scenarios, you should definitely give it a look, I would say. So that was like the really rapid rinse down on our origin, a little bit of a comparison between Auth0 and Zitadel, also where we took some inspiration from here. So join us on our journey. We have a quite lovely and active Discord community. If you have any question, you can definitely go there. There's also good things happening on GitHub. There is also discussions and issues there. You can give a step. We naturally have a website. There's also quite a lot of documentation there. And we will upload this video in after a few minutes when we recorded it. So stay tuned for that. And with that said, I spoken all the words I have for you. If there is any questions, just shoot them at me. I'm happy to give you pointers and answers.
Thank you very much, Flo. We did have a couple of questions come through. One of the questions asks, can you explain the difference between Auth0's single sign-on tax model, the SSO tax model, and Zitadel's approach?
I mean, the SSO tax model is always a fun thing, right? That's down to, if you start enabling customers to use their existing identity infrastructure that you get charged for, I mean, the SSO tax problem will not go away in that fast, I would say, because nowadays many companies use it as an enterprise nudge. I think that's just the difference between Auth0 and us is a little bit into the detail there, because in Auth0 you pay for the user-entered connection. Connection meaning like, you also pay for besides the user, you also pay for having a connection to, let's say, an IDP. And our pricing will generally more evolve into the let's not pay for the user, but let's pay for the connection. Whether that technically still classifies as an SSO tax problem, well, I think that's the debate there is more like where does a tool provide the value? And I think SSO in general provides a good amount of value, especially in regard of security, that customers should be willing to pay a little bit for. But also, it should not be in addition to a user. So I think it's either pay for the user or pay for the single sign-on connection, but not both. That I feel that's kind of weird, but that's just my hot take on it.
Okay, thank you. There's another question that came up asking to double down a little more on the multi-tenancy approaches and how the Auth0's approach on multi-tenancy is different from Zitadel's approach.
So bear with me here because my information can be outdated, right? So that's my big disclaimer here. But last time when I was educating myself on Auth0's capabilities, it was like in Auth0's data model, you squeeze all the users into one big pot and then assign them to let's say different organizations, or I think whatever they call it nowadays, but it's different organizations. So a user can be within multiple organizations essentially. But I think that's kind of flawed because in that case, it's unclear who owns or maintains or controls the user. So our take there is generally like Zitadel has a concept of organizations, and you can have as many of them as you wish in one Zitadel system essentially. And in such an organization, a user is uniquely only in that organization because it makes control of ownership quite clear. So somebody who controls an organization can control the user therein. But to allow customers to have access to multiple organizations, we have a delegated access management model, which essentially allows customer A to give a user from customer B access rights to things. But that's pure authorization in our take. So I think the model quite bigly diverges from, hey, a user can be only in one thing versus, hey, you can assign the user to all of them. My take really is here, since it's an ownership problem, I favor the clear segregation of like, there is a user in here, it belongs to that organization, and only that organization can change things. Because in the other model, it's kind of unclear who can change, for example, things like who can trigger a password reset for that user, who can delete an authenticator, because that's down to ownership then. So I think that's quite a big difference in the two multi-tenancy models that we see here.
Okay, thank you. A couple more questions. One of them says they have complex organizational hierarchies, and they're trying to figure out if Auth0 is better suited for their organization or if Citadel is better suited. They also added for customer identity management. They're a B2B SaaS company needing customer identity management. They're asking which platform offers better delegation capabilities.
I would say in regard of the authentication capabilities, we are roundabout on par. I think a thing that Auth0 has out of the box that we don't have is like sending a magic link. Nonetheless, you can build that on Zitadel. It's just not there out of the box, I would say. I think we provide a little bit of better value in regard of configuration options on integrating existing identity sources, but that could have changed in the recent time. So I need to recheck on that one to have some confidence, I would say. But generally speaking, I think in a B2B scenario, Citadel's approach is a little bit more elegant, especially around of like, you can also give out control over an organization to your customers. Like in a B2B case, you might want to give the customer of yours the ability to manage his users. And I don't think that's feasible yet with Auth0, but their portfolio might have changed though again. Yeah.
Okay. There is one question that probably leads to the next event that we have, a follow-up event that we have on Discord. The question is, what does the migration path look like when one's moving from Auth0 to Zitadel?
Oh, there is quite a lot of different options there. we have a whole flow chart of things, but I think our people will share more insights there in the follow-up thing here. The bottom line is, I mean, you can import the password hashes from Auth0 into Citadel if you happen to have or get them. So that's a point. You can single sign on in users from Auth0, so you can do like a progressive cutover phase. So that's kind of another route to take. But yeah, there is, as said, there is more options. I said there's a whole flow chart, but I think it's really down to whether you want to lift and shift the thing or whether you want to do a gradual migration. Yeah. So I see there is a LinkedIn question there. If someone migrates from a homegrown solution, what free advantages do I get when I go to Citadel? Oh, that is a good question. I mean, I would say we can start on different things, but I would say let's start on the multi-tenancy fees. You get a good amount of multi-tenancy with a lot of configuration options. Like you can literally configure policies for each of your customers. It can be things like whether they can use passkeys or not, and whether they need to do OTP or whether they have a single sign-on provider and all these things. It even goes down to deprovisioning users, like, for example, through Skin as an API. So we also support that. So I would just say we take the heavy lifting of all the integrations and compliances to their, let's say, established or enterprise standards here, because we take care of that for you. I also believe that while we run quite a professional organization on that end, we spend a lot of time doing pen tests, mitigating security issues, caring after the performance problems that we have or see. So I would say what you get is a well-maintained identity infrastructure piece that just does the work for you and is solid in regard of availability and performance, but also solid in regard of its scrutiny that it does on the security end. For example, we're just in the midst of running another pen test with external testers, which we do that from time to time. We'll share the results in public because we as again dearly believe in the transparency there. And I don't think typical app teams internally have the bandwidth to allocate the same amount of resources into these areas. So I think that's also a benefit. And I think the third big thing that you get out of it is, especially if you end up in a contract with us, we have quite a good amount of well-trained engineers that can handle your support cases quite efficient. So if you come to us and become a customer, you will get access to well-trained engineers who worked in the field. We also have, funnily enough, now more than 5 employees that are from Okta and Auth0's territory. So there seems to be something up to what we're working on. And I can promise you that it's not like you're going through like a first level support thingy here. So, but we give our customers really good support and understand how critical an identity service is to their needs. So I think these are the top 3 things that you would get out of it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's only one. Thank you, Yordis, for the good shout out there. We certainly strive to become the de facto open source power player in the identity infrastructure space. We just believe that there can be a lot of good things done in our space powered by open source. So with that said, I don't think I have any questions left, right?
No, I don't see any more.
Perfect. With that said, there is a follow-up event to this whole thing that's about migrating from Auth0 to Citadel and diving into the meat of it. So it's more like a workshop where a customer success engineer will tell you, hey, that's how you can approach the general subject. And that will happen on June the 25th. So relatively soon. I think it's in 2 weeks. I would love to see you guys there. And until then,